Okay, so welcome everyone. We're so glad to be together. Here come a couple more people. This is the week prior to the election, and we're so fortunate to have Charles Tien with us to discuss the coming election, to consider the poll results, and to see what we can be expecting going forward. A little bit about Charles. He is a personal friend of mine, and I'm so glad to see you, Charles. Charles Tien
Likewise.
is a professor of political science at Hunter College and the Graduate Center at CUNY. He has taught undergraduate and graduate courses on American politics, women and minorities in politics, voting and elections, American foreign policy, research methods, and polling. Charles was nice enough to speak to us 4 years ago after Hillary Clinton lost the election. We were so shocked by the results, especially because the polls had really indicated that she would win. And Charles came and spoke to us and really indicated where the weak links were in the polling system. So Charles, I'd like to welcome you and ask for your kind of take on what we can expect. It looks like Biden is ahead in the polls, but what are the realities? Can we trust the polls? And what can we expect? Thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for that nice introduction, Leslie. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and fun to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation after this short presentation. So Leslie asked me to do like a 15-minute presentation. So what I have here is a forecast, and so political scientists are doing forecasts. We've been doing forecasts of elections for about 30 some years, I guess, or longer. And we use statistical models and forecasting, right? Just like the weather is a prediction about the future. And so the forecasting model that I'm going to show you is something that was made on August 27th. So the forecast model that I've been using, can predict the election results, and I'll show you how accurate or how wrong it's been, I guess, going back with data to 1948. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about the presidential elections in general to help us understand what's going on maybe in 2020 in terms of what we can expect for an outcome. And this title slide here kind of gives away, right, the conclusion or the punchline here is that the forecast models, I have models for both the Electoral College vote, the popular vote, and also for seat change in the House and Senate, is forecasting a blue wave election, meaning it's forecasting a landslide for Biden, and then also significant seat gains for the Democrats in both the House and the Senate. And so why is the model coming to this conclusion? So a few things first about elections in general. This is a figure that I'm going to walk you through here so it becomes clear what the heck, these dots and lines are. So on the y-axis, we're looking at the incumbent party's share of the two-party Electoral College vote. So if you have 270 Electoral College votes, right, if the incumbent party wins 270, which is what Trump needs, you have a little over 50% of the Electoral College vote. And you have what you see over time is that you see a lot of bouncing around up until the early 90s. And so what that means is that you have big landslide elections up until the 1990s. So for example, in 1956, Eisenhower won with over 80% of the Electoral College vote. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson's big landslide, he won with close to 90% of the electoral vote. Nixon's win in 1972 was even larger, and the largest in this post-World War II period was for Reagan in 1984. And so look what happens essentially after 96 and especially after 2000. You can see that the percentage of votes either won or lost by the incumbent party in the Electoral College has dramatically shrunk. Okay, and so what that means, right, is it's an indicator that we're in a more polarized environment. There are fewer moderates in the country, and that means elections are about turning out your base rather than convincing moderates or swing voters, because very few voters are undecided and very few voters will vote outside of their party allegiance. Same thing, right, is happening with the popular vote. So this is just the same graph. Instead of charting the Electoral College vote, it's charting the popular vote. And you can see also here, right, the bouncing up and down, right? It's just the margins of the popular vote win are much smaller after 2000 or in the last 20 years than they were 50 years in the 50 years before that, right? And so what that means is you're less likely to see landslide elections these days, okay? Or maybe, you know, a 55% win is a landslide election. And also, right, when you're near the 50% threshold for popular vote, that's where you're more likely to see undemocratic outcomes in the Electoral College, and right where the winner of the popular vote then loses in the Electoral College. The other thing that you know, we see is a pattern in presidential elections is that incumbent parties, especially if they're just running for their second term, almost always win, right? And so that means, right, if you've been in power for 4 years, you're running for re-election, going back to 1948, the only candidate or party to have lost in such a situation is Jimmy Carter in 1980, right? And so in 1980, you know, Carter was extremely unpopular. Some would say, right, it was an unusual election year. You had the Iran hostage crisis. You had stagflation, and those things resulted in an unpopular president. You had a very, very bad economy, and in 1980, right, he's the only first-term incumbent to have lost in the last, you know, you can go back also through the FDR years. So, you know, back the last 90, almost 100 years, he's the only first-term incumbent to have lost. And so if Trump loses, right, it's an unusual outcome because he's a first-term incumbent. The other thing that we know is that the economy matters, right? And when the economy is doing well, when growth is over here, in this chart, the blue bars are years where growth was over 1.5% in the first 2 quarters of the election year. And the red bars show when there's negative growth or growth less than 1.5% again in the first 2 quarters. And what do you see? You see, right, and if you look at those red bars and you look at the 50% line, right, that's the threshold for winning the election. Again, in most of those situations, you have the incumbent party losing. So in 1956, you have Eisenhower, very popular president, with a not so great economy, winning. And then in 2012, you have Obama with a not so great economy, but coming out of the Great Recession, winning re-election. The only year here where there's negative growth, again, 1980. And so all of you know, right? You don't need me to tell you that the economy right now is in the dumps. And so actual growth measured over the first 2 quarters, non-annualized for 2020, is -5. So again, right, 2020 kind of joins the 1980 year in terms of the only presidential election year in the last 70 years here with negative growth. So based on how the economy is doing, you can expect Trump to lose. Last thing here, right? We also know that elections are essentially referendums on the incumbent, especially. What that means is, one, it doesn't really matter who the opposition party is running in years in which the incumbent is very popular or not so popular. Okay, and you can see here the red bars where the president's approval rating in July of the election year is less than 50%, and when that's the case, again, the incumbent party tends to lose. Okay, again, you know, just two elections where the incumbents and the incumbent party's approval ratings less than 50%, was that party able to win. Again, 1948 with Truman, and 2004 with Bush. Okay, and again, you know, this election, in terms of the predicted outcome, in terms of the economy, in terms of an unpopular president, again, looks like 1980, right? And so Trump's approval ratings in July, measured in July, was 41%. So not as low as Carter, but you know, he's never been able to cross really the 50% threshold, and he's bounced between 40 and 50, essentially, maybe the high 30s, but that's an indication, again, of a polarized electorate. So no matter what he does, no matter how terrible things are, 40% of the electorate seems to be supportive of him, but never really more than 50%. So what the forecast model does is it takes these things into consideration all at once. So here, right, this is a statistical model. So those of you, right, who had statistics back in college, you can remember probably regression analysis, and this is essentially a multivariate regression analysis. You know, you don't need to know the details of that, but what I want to convey to you is, you know, taking into consideration the president's low approval rating, taking into consideration the negative economic growth over the first 2 quarters this year, the forecast is for Trump to win 43% of the vote, barely 43% of the popular vote. And so that's essentially a landslide for Biden, is what you know, this statistical model is showing, right? And so this is the model that I also used in 2016. And so this will get a little bit to maybe the polling question that I'll talk about after I go through the slides, which is that, right, in 2016, this model predicted Hillary would win 51.1% of the vote, when Hillary won actually 51% of the 2-party vote. Okay, so it was very accurate, but it was forecasting the wrong thing, meaning that, right, it wasn't forecasting the Electoral College vote, which is what really matters now. So learning from my error of 2016 and kind of ignoring the Electoral College this year, right, also looking at the Electoral College vote, I also just use the popular vote to forecast the electoral college vote. And if you see this figure, you can see that right, the popular vote, which is along the x-axis, plotted against the electoral college vote along the y-axis, you can see that the points from 1948 to 2016, form a very narrow band of points. And what that essentially means is that the two are very strongly related, which is a good thing, right? Because you want the popular vote to reflect what is going to happen in the electoral college vote. Okay, and so with an essential landslide in the popular vote these days, right, of a 56, almost 57% two-party vote for Biden, that translates into only 68 electoral votes for Donald Trump, right? And so, right, this model is forecasting a landslide in both the popular vote and the electoral college vote, and right, it's reflective of what some of the polls are showing right now, with Biden up by 10 percentage points in nationwide polls. So let me just conclude, with some takeaway points. No landslides anymore, really. So right, this is an unusual year in that it's predicting a landslide in an era where there aren't really landslides anymore, or big margins of victory. The other takeaway point, right? If you want to understand anything about American politics or predict anything about American political elections, just pick the incumbent, whether that be for president, whether that be for House or Senate elections. In House election races, incumbents win about 94% of the time. And in Senate races, it's about 80% of the time incumbents win, right? That's the sitting office holder. Referendums, elections are referendums on the economy, and also about right, the incumbents' handling of the economy and other matters. And so looking at Trump's poor handling of COVID, of the economy, of race relations, and everything else, right, the model's pointing to a landslide victory for Biden. The model essentially, right, takes all these factors and also makes predictions for the House and Senate. And instead of going through the details there, right, I'm just giving you the final forecast there. It's a 32-seat gain for Democrats and a 12-seat gain for Democrats in the Senate. So if Biden wins, like the forecast is predicting, he would be working with clear Democratic majorities in both the House and the Senate. So for those Democrats out there amongst you, right, I guess you can be happy about this forecast. If you're a Republican, not so happy. So with that, I'm happy to talk about the election. Anything here, or polls? Should we trust the polls? Why shouldn't we trust the polls?
Charles, I just had a question about this, and then before you go on, fascinated
Sure.
to hear about the polls as well. Has gerrymandering hasn't had an effect on the idea that there's no landslides? It seems like such a strange concept that there is, restructuring of counties and things for voting to get blocks. Has that had an effect?
Sure. So gerrymandering certainly has an effect, but gerrymandering affects congressional races, right? And so districts, right, that are drawn to favor one party or another, right? These are districts at the House level or at state level or even city level, right, for these congressional district or geographical districts, right? And so with states, you can't all of a sudden expand New York into Pennsylvania.
Does it have any effect on the Electoral College?
Does gerrymandering affect the Electoral
delegates.
College?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So gerrymandering, right, for local races could affect then who controls state houses, right? And state houses in most of the states are where the district lines are drawn. And so, right, so you can gerrymander a local district for a state assembly or a state senate district, and we had, right, terribly gerrymandered districts in New York for a while, where Republicans were controlling the state senate, even though, right, a large overwhelming majority of New York voters were Democratic, and so. That allowed, right, the Senate to be held by Republicans, which then advantaged somewhat, right, Republicans in the drawing of congressional districts. I don't know if that
Yes, thank you. That helps.
Answers your question.
So, Charles, first of all, can you take the PowerPoint down, and then we can just share it. But so it sounds like we should be celebrating. You know, we should really just, party hardy because we're winning and it's all, a done deal. What could go wrong? What do we have to worry about?
Well, lots of things, right? Lots of things. I think everybody's kind of worried about Trump trying to, quote unquote, steal the election or stop the counting. And so, the Supreme Court in 2000 stopped the counting in Florida, and Trump has already hinted at wanting to stop the counting on election night. And so he said, we deserve, we need some clarity on election night. He suggested even the law says we have to have an announced winner on election night, which is clearly wrong, right? Which is clearly a lie. But historically, Republicans have tended to vote in person more, and Democrats have tended to vote by absentee or mail-in ballot more. And so what would happen is that over the course of the night or after the election day, as more mail-in ballots were counted, the Democratic vote count would typically increase. And so the fear is, come midnight or whenever, especially if the media act, I would say, irresponsibly and start calling states too early before all the votes are counted, he says, we need to stop counting. We need some clarity. We don't need chaos. And states comply, and right, you have a lot of ballots, mail-in ballots that don't get counted, and on election night, if he's winning, let's say in Florida and Texas, maybe even Pennsylvania, Michigan does not allow the opening and processing of mail-in ballots until election day. So we're not going to get a result, right, from Michigan if there are lots of mail-in ballots. So I would say, that's the concern, and if that happens, I think we all know that the streets will be packed with protesters, and right, that's the fears that we have violence in the streets, that we have an outcome that's unclear. We have tens of, not hundreds of, probably not hundreds of thousands, but because there aren't hundreds of thousands of ballots, but thousands of ballots that aren't counted. That would be a disaster.
Is that legal for him to call that? Like, is there some sort of law that says he can stop that? Stop the vote, stop the counting?
Stop the counting. Well, we live in a federalist system, and so what a federalist system means is that we don't have a national election system. We have 50 different state election systems, broken up and then to local jurisdictions, we have over, I think, 50,000 different electoral jurisdictions in this country, and there's no laws governing necessarily, right, how elections are carried, no national laws in terms of how elections are carried out. So that's why, right, you have mail-in ballots only in some states, like Washington and Oregon. That's why in New York, right, in the past, we've had very restrictive voting, and right, this is the first year where you can cast the mail-in ballot without any reason in New York. And so they just passed that this year because of COVID. And a good question would be, well, once COVID is over, are they going to continue to allow people to vote easily, or are they going to go back to a more restrictive voting system? And so it depends on the localities. It depends on the rules of the localities. So do you have a postmark, right? If the ballot arrives, and this is why there's so much concern about the postal system and Trump trying to subvert the postal system. Let's say the ballot arrives without a postmark a day after the election or before. Do you count that? In Pennsylvania, right, there's this thing about 2 envelopes, right? So you have to seal your ballot in an unsigned, unmarked envelope, and then put it in another envelope that you mail it in. And if you forget to use the second envelope, they'll throw it out. I voted by absentee mail-in, and after I heard reports that, well, right, they're going to be matching signatures from your voter registration, right, to your mail-in ballot, I came to the realization that my ballot probably is going to be invalidated, because I registered to vote in my jurisdiction over 25 years ago. And when I signed my ballot, I didn't think about what my signature looked 25 years ago, right? They're going to match it to that. I don't know about any of you, but my signature has changed dramatically over 25 years, right? And so when I was younger, I was much more careful about signing my name. It was much more legible. Now it's just a bigger scribble. And so, depending on who the poll worker is that opens the ballot, my ballot could be invalidated. So how many ballots are going to be invalidated in all of these different voting jurisdictions? We have no idea.
What I was saying, could Trump say, is there a law that Trump says, I don't want to be more counting?
That would be then for the courts to step in, right? And in 2000, right? I said, right, in Gore, Bush v. Gore, the court told Florida to stop counting. Already, right, the court has ruled, I believe, in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Board of Elections wanted to count ballots for up to 3 days after, right, election day if there was a postmark, and the court did not support that decision. And so now with Amy Coney Barrett on the court, you have a 6-3 right, conservative majority. Who knows how they're going to rule? Now they ruled a couple decisions. I think it was 2 days ago in Michigan and in North Carolina that favored the continued counting of ballots after election day. So we can be hopeful, but we should also be cautious.
I think we just think, oh, a vote is a vote and it gets counted, but there's so many stipulations that I don't think the general public's aware of. This is something
right, and so
do.
However you're voting, somebody said, read that ballot like a wedding invitation, right? Be very careful in that reading of knowing the dates and the deadlines and the instructions, right? Do you want fish or salmon? Salmon or chicken or steak or beef? Make sure you use the correct instrument. You sign in the right place. In New York, I noticed there was there's a scan on the inside envelope, right, that has to go in the window and the outside envelope. Otherwise, it won't get scanned in properly. And so my wife, when she stuffed it in, she just stuffed it in carelessly. And I said, "Wait, you can't. Be careful. Your ballot may be invalidated. Though it's probably mine now, right, with my sloppy signature, that may get invalidated."
So it sounds like for Biden to win a secure victory, he needs to do overwhelmingly well on election night itself, because everything else could be kind of up for grabs.
Yes.
Is that
yes,
a fair statement?
Yes. So that's the right, the scenario in which you have a decisive victory on election night. There's hope for that because Florida does allow for the early, at least, preparation of counting mail-in ballots. And so if Biden wins Florida, the map for Trump looks, really hard. And so if we have a decisive victory, because the mail-in ballots for Florida will probably be known on election night or early that morning, the next morning, that's I would say a key state to watch. So yes, a decisive victory that right, the media outlets will call, even Fox News will call, that would be important, because then right, the wind is taken out of Trump's sails in a sense, and the Republicans would have less of a convincing argument to contest the election.
Charles, I was struck with the last election. A lot of people didn't vote. And so it sort of turned out that Trump won by 26%, I think it was, of the popular vote. Do you think this time, because so many more people are actively, worried and are getting out to vote, that'll, have a big effect in favor of the Democrats?
I think so. So of the right, the early voting that's occurred already, I haven't looked yesterday or today, but when I checked 2 days ago, the advantage in terms of some of the exit polling that's been done by on people who have voted early, there's been a huge advantage for Democrats, registered Democrats. So I think almost a 2-to-1 advantage. But remember, Republicans tend to vote more on election day. In this case, who knows, right? Since we're in such an unusual case. So to date, 2 days ago, and it's even more now, to date, I think, maybe 60% of the votes that were cast in 2016 have already been cast. So that's good news, I would say, for Biden supporters, because I think Democrats are more energized this year than Republicans. You saw that from the 2018 midterm elections. You saw that from the women's protests the day after the inauguration, when so many people turned out to protest. And so Democrats, especially women, I think, have been energized and they've been waiting to vote for 4 years, essentially. And the other hopeful thing is turnout, in the early voting amongst 18 to 29-year-olds has also been higher than expected. And so that's a demographic that historically has not voted. But we know that younger voters tend to be more Democratic. And so with the surge in younger voters who tend to vote Democrat, that's also another positive sign for Biden.
Thank you. Should we hear a little about polling? Because polling's always been kind of mysterious.
Sure. So Leslie, going back to your question, what went wrong, I guess, maybe in 2016, and should we trust the polling now? So I think one, the American Association of Political Opinion Research right, they put together a panel and they wrote a report, and they looked at what went wrong in the 2016 polling. And they concluded not much, right? And so one way to look at it is that what is a poll? A poll is a snapshot in time. There's not a single pollster in the United States who would say that a poll can predict something that's, or at least an election outcome that's going to happen in a week. And so polls typically ask, if the election were held today, who would you vote for? Okay, and so, right, you're getting a snapshot. People may change their minds. And in 2016, there were a lot of late deciders. Way fewer late deciders this year, right? And so that's one reason to be hopeful why that maybe the polls will be more accurate this year than last year. The polls that we were all looking at were giving us a share, right, of the two-party or the popular vote, the nationwide popular vote. And I don't need to tell you or remind you who won the nationwide popular vote, right? And so in that respect, right, if the polls were predicting or telling us anything, it was that Hillary was going to win the popular vote, which she did. So, right, you might say, well, you know, the polls weren't so bad. We were just interpreting them incorrectly. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a lot of talk among people working on the campaign about trying to win over undecided voters.
There are none.
I find it hard to wrap my head around the idea that people are undecided at this point. Who are these undecided voters?
Right. No, if you're an undecided voter, you probably spent the last 4 years on Mars or something like that.
Right. I mean, what would be like a demographic profile of undecided voters? Are they people who are not very interested in politics, or who think they're all the same, it's all a bunch of crooks, or do they just want attention? I
wouldn't say they're not paying attention. I would say your classic maybe undecided voter is what we would call a cross-pressured voter. And so, right, meaning that you have issues pulling you in different directions. Mm-hmm. So, you know, let's take, for example, I don't know, a college-educated, wealthy, Republican male or even female, college-educated, living in Connecticut, right? You know, parents of moderate Republicans. There are no such thing anymore, but their parents were, and so, right, they may identify strongly with their Republican Party roots. They may be wealthy. They may have made a lot of money from the tax cuts that Trump put in. You know, secretly in their heart, they may agree on his immigration stances, and I think a lot of white voters in that profile do actually agree. Right? They don't like the harsh language that he uses, but you know, they don't like what Trump has been saying. You know, open borders in a sense, and so. Those voters they voted for Trump in 2016, and all of the things that you know gave them reason to vote for Trump in 2016 maybe still exists right now. But you know, they know that but they're repelled this year also by what's happened in the last 4 years, and. Mm-hmm. Maybe the undecided voter stays at home, right? It's well, there's no way I'm going to vote Democrat, but I'm just not. So instead of voting Democrat, I leave that line blank, or I stay at home and I don't vote. So you know, that's the undecided voter to me, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Jeremy, did you have a question?
You're muted. I can't hear you, at least.
Jeremy, you're still muted.
You can type the question. You can type the question in your chat box.
That is not like you as an audio person. Maybe unmute yourself again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
Now
No.
it shows he's unmuted. What about
No.
your mic? Do you have any? Oh, he doesn't have a headset. Sometimes you can have him double muted. Huh. Maybe he doesn't want to talk to us.
No, he does.
Maybe write it in the chat.
Okay.
Charles, while we're getting Jeremy's question, I was curious, who do they poll? I've never polled. You know,
Right. So that's a great question. And that's the other part of the answer here. There's a population and then there's a sample, right? And so to be accurate in terms of your poll, you have to have a sample that's reflective of your population. And so, right, in nationwide polls, right, 41% I said supported the way Trump was handling his job as president. And that's of people living in the United States. And so that's easy to sample, because that's just, you know, you don't have to figure out who's going to vote or who's not going to vote. And so another reason why it's really hard to poll for election outcomes is it's hard as heck to figure out who's going to actually vote. Right? And so the pollster has to figure out, you know, are you actually going to vote? And maybe you don't even know whether you're going to be voting on election day, but or something happens on election day. It's a terrible rainy day like today. You know, you had a meeting early on in the day and you're feeling a little, you know, tired. Are you going to get up an hour early to go vote? Are you gonna you know, stay an hour later? This is right pre-COVID, and so the pollster has to figure out, right? And they usually ask, "Are you registered? Did you vote in the past? Do you plan on voting this coming election?" And so they randomly sample, right? Meaning that they have a frame that they use to randomly generate phone numbers, and then they call people. And then who the heck answers a poll these days? Who the heck answers a phone if you don't recognize the number?
Yeah.
Nobody, right? And so a good poll is based on a good sample, which is representative of people who vote. So if nobody picks up their phone, right, especially if it's an unknown number, nobody knows if they're going to vote, or it's hard to determine whether you're going to vote, then it becomes even harder, right, to come up with a prediction of what, right, the electorate looks like. So what they do is they do their sample. Now the response rate's only about 10%, right, which is terrible. And in the past it was 50%, right? And so we're inundated. We don't like pollsters, and we don't pick up the call because we all have caller ID. And nobody has landlines anymore, right? Or if you do, you don't answer it. And so people are really hard to reach, especially young people who are people of color, especially young people who are male and people of color. So those are really hard to reach people. okay, if you're a pollster. So then what they end up doing is they weight, right, their respondents. And meaning that, right, if you're a Black male age 20 and somehow you get, right, you get into a sample, you pick up your phone and you answer, your answers are going to be weighted a lot more than right, probably your answer, Lisa, because Lisa, you're probably a highly educated white female, and right, you tend to answer your phone more, maybe, okay, or right, for those of us who still have parents alive, maybe, right, they would tend to pick up the phone on a landline and answer. They're easier to reach, right? And so different polling houses have different weighting schemes, and you know, they try to weight to what they believe, right, the electorate will look like on election day. So if they're right, right, not enough women in the sample, they'll weight women more. And so, right, this weighting scheme, is proprietary information. So very few polling operations will disclose their weighting scheme, and so it's hard to evaluate these polls. But you know, places like realclearpolitics.com or 538, they own the, so what's the solution? You take an average of all the polls, because even if you do a poll really, really well, there's still a 5% chance you get a wacky result because you get an unrepresentative sample. But if you take, you know, all the polls that are done by quality polling operations and you take an average, we have greater confidence in those results. So 538 averages polls, right? And so don't just rely on a single poll. Look at places that take averages of a bunch of polls, of a bunch of high quality polls.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Now is my audio.
There we go.
Hey, someone was diddling with my computer overnight. Anyways, just a quick question about the standardization of the way elections are run. What needs to be improved? What's sort of at the top of your list of, can it be federally mandated and standardized?
Yeah, just make it easier for people to vote. Make it a national holiday, or put it on a weekend, or make it same day registration. Everybody knows what would increase turnout. It's just politicians don't want to make it easier to vote, because you know they've figured out they can win with the electorate that they have, and so why change that formula? So in New York, we're terrible. I mean, just awful in terms of right, increasing suffrage, increasing the vote. You have to register something like 30 days out before the election. If right, you want to switch parties and vote in the other party's primary, or let's say you're an independent, you registered as an independent, you can't vote in any party's primary. And now, right, you're excited about a candidate. To have changed parties and vote in the primary, you have to have changed that registration like 90 days out. I mean, who does that, right? Almost nobody 90 days out remembers to change their party registration so they can vote. So the rules that we have in place, right, just disenfranchise voters. And you know, we could, the Tuesday, you know, was based on this being an agricultural country, right, 200 some years ago. So I guess on Saturday you went to the market, right? If you're a farmer, so you didn't want to vote on Saturday, and if you were Sunday you went to church, so you didn't want to make it that Sunday, and so they stuck it on a Tuesday. But that was 200 years ago. We're not an agricultural economy anymore, and the Electoral College also was created 200 years ago for a country that was different from what we have now. So that's the other thing in terms about laws about our election is the Electoral College has to meet in the middle of December. It's something like the second Tuesday after or the first Wednesday after the second Monday in December. The Electoral College is going to meet. Right? Doesn't matter what Trump says. Doesn't matter what the popular vote was in any of these states. Electors are going to meet in the middle of December, and they're going to cast their ballots, and those ballots are going to be sent to Washington, D.C., and those ballots are going to be open in the beginning of January, and we're going to have a president, a new president.
What happens if in the interim Trump is contesting the election and it's before the Supreme Court? Does the Electoral College still meet?
Yes.
Or the Supreme Court order them to postpone?
I can't see them ordering them to postpone because the Electoral College is mandated in the Constitution. And so if they somehow, and all the court does is interpret the law and interpret the Constitution. And the Constitution is clear on when the Electoral College meets and how you become president. And so if for some reason nobody wins the majority of the Electoral College vote, which is possible, you could get 269 to 269. You could have contested votes in one state or two states or multiple states. It's not clear who the electoral vote should go to. So we don't have verified and delivered electoral votes from a state, which has happened in the past. Early January, when the vice president opens the ballots that have been sent from each of the states, if nobody clears 270, the election immediately goes to the House of Representatives for a decision. But it's by state vote. Every state only gets one vote. So, right, there may be 27 New York members of Congress. Those 27 have to somehow decide who New York is going to cast its one vote for. And of course, it's going to be by party vote, right? If the current House doesn't change, there are 26 state delegations where the Republican Party is in the majority. So if you get to the scenario where the election goes to the House, it's possible, right, that you have a Trump presidency. Now, the vice president is selected by the Senate, the newly seated Senate. And so let's say the makeup of the Senate goes to the Democrats. So you could have, a Trump-Harris outcome. These are only crazy things, I guess, political scientists think about, but it's a far-fetched possibility.
So I'd like to basically thank you, Charles.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
We're going to have a cocktail reception following this official comment. So everyone is invited to stay on for a few minutes and mingle and, taste the hors d'oeuvres and have some martinis on us.
What are you serving, Leslie? Leslie makes great.
Yeah, anything you want, Charles, you can have. So thank you.
A cup of water.
End of our official comments, and now we start the cocktail party, and I stop recording. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That was wonderful,
Thank you.
Charles.
Thank you. That was so interesting.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you for coming. People maybe want to share their voting stories. You don't have to tell us who you voted for.